There's something profoundly ironic about life. The ones who leave often find themselves looking back. The ones who take you for granted suddenly wake up when they realize you're no longer standing where they left you. But here's the truth. Chasing someone who walked away will never bring them back the way you want. Because real power doesn't lie in pursuit. It lies in presence, in transformation, in the quiet, undeniable shift of becoming someone they can no longer ignore. People don't return because you beg them to stay. They return when they feel the absence of what they once overlooked. And that absence isn't about playing games or pretending not to care. It's about rediscovering the version of yourself that doesn't need their validation to feel whole. So if someone walked away, let them. If they left, let them. Because when you do these two things, things that change you, not them, they won't just notice your absence, they'll chase it. Detachment is the ultimate power, not because it creates distance, but because it reclaims control. When someone leaves you, the first instinct is to chase, to seek answers, to demand closure. But what if I told you that the greatest statement you can make is not in your words, not in your pleading, but in your silence? True detachment is not an act of revenge. It is an act of self-liberation. It is the moment you stop giving someone the power to dictate your emotions and instead you turn inward, reclaiming the energy you once poured into them. There is something undeniably magnetic about a person who is no longer seeking validation from another. The very act of letting go creates a paradox. When you no longer chase, you become the one pursued. This is because detachment forces the other person to sit with their own choices, without the comfort of your presence assuring them that you are still waiting. The absence of your energy creates a vacuum, one that can only be filled by their own realization of what they have lost. People do not appreciate what they believe will always be available to them. They take kindness for granted. They assume that love, once given, is theirs to hold forever. But the moment you withdraw, not out of bitterness, not as a tactic, but as a genuine act of self-respect, the dynamic shifts. They start to question. They wonder why the person who once cared so deeply has gone quiet. It is in that silence that their mind begins to turn, searching for the warmth that once surrounded them, only to find it missing. And that is where the power lies, not in anger, not in resentment, but in the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who knows their worth. Detachment does not mean you stop feeling. It means you stop allowing your feelings to control you. It means you recognize that love should never be a force that diminishes you, but one that elevates you. And if someone cannot see your value while you are present, they must learn it in your absence. Think about it. How many times in life have you truly appreciated something only after it was gone? A job, a friendship, a moment in time that you wished you had cherished more? It is human nature to overlook what is familiar, to take for granted what seems guaranteed. But loss has a way of awakening a clarity that presence often blinds us to. When you detach, you are not just creating distance, you are giving the other person the space to see you in a way they never did before. This is not about playing games. It is not about manipulation. It is about standing so firmly in your own power that you no longer need to beg for attention or validation. The most attractive energy is not desperation, it is confidence. It is the quiet assurance of someone who knows that their presence is a privilege, not a given. And when that realization hits, the one who left begins to see you differently. They remember the way you made them feel, the moments of security and comfort they once had with you. They start to question why they left in the first place. Was it truly what they wanted? Or were they simply acting out of impulse, assuming you would always be there to catch them if they turned back? The uncertainty begins to grow, and suddenly they find themselves chasing the very thing they once walked away from. But here's the truth. By the time they come back, you will have already changed. Because detachment does not just shift their perception of you, it transforms the way you see yourself. You will have learned that your happiness was never dependent on their presence. You will have discovered a strength within you that was always there, just waiting to be claimed. And that is the real power. Not in making them chase, but in realizing that you no longer need to be chased at all. So, let them go. Let them experience the emptiness that follows your absence. Let them wonder, let them regret. Not because you want them to suffer, but because you deserve to be valued, not just when you are there, but even when you are not. And when they finally return, as they often do, you will not have to wonder whether you should take them back, because by then you will have already chosen yourself. Confidence is not about proving something to others. It is about knowing something within yourself. And when you are, knowing the confidence is not about proving something to others. It is about knowing something within yourself. The moment you stop seeking external validation, you shift the entire dynamic of any relationship. People are drawn to certainty, to strength, to the quiet, unwavering energy of someone who knows their worth without needing constant reminders. This is the key. When you stop needing their approval, their attention, or their return, that is precisely when they begin to take notice. There is an undeniable allure to someone who is self-assured, not arrogant, not indifferent, but deeply grounded in their own value. When you reach this space, you are no longer operating from a place of scarcity, from fear of losing someone. Instead, you are standing in abundance, fully aware that your life, your happiness, your essence, none of it is dependent on any one person's presence. That shift in energy is powerful. It is what makes the one who walked away suddenly start to question their decision. When you were available, when you gave endlessly, when you reassured them of your love, they may have taken it for granted. They may have assumed you would always be there, waiting, holding space for them, even in their absence. But the moment you reclaim your power, the moment you stop asking, stop explaining, stop waiting, that is when they feel the difference. Suddenly, they are no longer certain of your place in their life. And uncertainty is what makes people wake up. We are conditioned to believe that chasing is the only way to keep someone's attention. That if we just say the right words, make them see our worth, remind them of what they are losing, they will return. But the truth is, attraction is rarely built in desperation. It is built in confidence, in self-assurance, in the realization that you are already whole with or without them. And that realization, when it is genuine, creates a gravitational pull that is impossible to ignore. Think about the people in your life you have admired, the ones who carry themselves with a quiet strength, who never seem to need validation from anyone. There is something about them, isn't there? A presence, a certainty. They do not chase approval because they already approve of themselves. They do not beg for love because they know their love is enough. And that energy is magnetic. It draws people in, effortlessly, without force, without persuasion. This is the secret. The moment you shift your focus inward, from proving your worth to simply embodying it, the world responds differently to you. The same people who left, who overlooked you, who treated your presence as optional, begin to see you in a different light, not because you changed for them, but because you changed for yourself. And that change, that growth is undeniable. People do not miss you when you are still waiting for them. They miss you when they realize you are no longer waiting at all, when they feel the absence of your energy, when they see you thriving without them, when they understand that your happiness is no longer tied to their validation. That is when their perception shifts. But here is the most important part. By the time they come back, by the time they recognize what they lost, you will have already transformed. And the question will no longer be whether they want you back. The question will be whether you still want them. Because in your journey of self-discovery, you may realize that the version of you they left behind is no longer the version of you that exists today. So stop proving, stop explaining, stop waiting. Focus on yourself, on your growth, on becoming so secure in who you are that their absence no longer defines you. And when they return, as they often do, it will not be because you convinced them. It will be because they finally saw what was always there. The difference is this time, you will see it too. Silence is not weakness. It is not surrender. It is not indifference. Silence, when chosen with intention, is one of the most powerful forces you possess. It speaks louder than words because it forces the other person to sit with the weight of their own choices. It holds up a mirror, making them confront the absence they once took for granted. And in that space of quiet, something profound happens. They begin to notice. There is something unnerving about a person who once gave so much, but suddenly stops. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because they have shifted their energy inward. When you pull back, when you stop reacting, when you no longer seek explanations, it creates a void. And nature, relationships, emotions, they all despise a vacuum. That emptiness demands to be filled. The question is, with what? When you constantly explain yourself, when you try to fix what someone else broke, you relieve them of the responsibility of realizing what they have done. They don't have to face it because you are doing the work for them. But the moment you step back, the moment you stop filling in the gaps with words, the weight of their actions or their absence settles on them. And it is in that silence that they begin to hear what they ignored all along. We live in a world that associates action with control. We believe that if we just say the right thing, if we explain ourselves better, if we try a little harder, we can change someone's mind. Make them see our worth, convince them to return. But true power is not in the chase. True power is in knowing when to walk away. Not as a tactic, not as a game, but as a realization of your own self-respect. Think about the moments in your life when you were forced to sit with your own emotion. The moments when there were no distractions, no explanations, no one trying to make things easier for you. It is uncomfortable, isn't it? But that discomfort is where self-awareness is born. And the same applies to the person who left, the one who overlooked you. When you give them silence, you force them into a space they cannot escape. A space where they have to confront what they lost. People often don't realize the depth of a connection until they feel the absence of it. It is easy to take warmth for granted until the cold sets in. It is easy to overlook kindness until it is no longer offered. And it is easy to assume someone will always be there until they are not. Your silence does not go unnoticed. It lingers. It unsettles. It makes them wonder. And that wondering, that shift in perception, is often the first step toward them coming back. Not because you manipulated them into it, not because you played a game, but because they finally see the reality of what they had. Because in your silence, they hear everything they refused to listen to before. But here's the real question. By the time they come back, will you still be there? Because the truth is, silence doesn't just change them, it changes you. It forces you to reflect, to heal, to grow in ways you never imagined. And in that growth, you may realize that the version of you they returned for no longer exists. You have evolved. You have stepped into a new chapter. And maybe, just maybe, you no longer need the apology, the explanation, or even their return. That is the irony of silence. It is meant to make them reflect, but in the end, it is you who gains the most clarity. It is you who finds peace. And once you have that peace, once you truly embrace your own worth, you will never again beg for someone to recognize it. So let your silence speak, not as a strategy, but as a statement. A statement that says, I am enough, with or without you. And that right there is the most powerful truth of all. There is a quiet power in transformation, one that doesn't announce itself, doesn't demand recognition, and certainly doesn't wait for validation. It just happens, and when it does, the world takes notice. People who once dismissed you, who walked away thinking they had the final say, suddenly start looking back, not because they had a change of heart overnight, but because something about you is different. And that difference makes them uncomfortable. You see, when someone leaves, they expect you to stay the same. They expect you to be trapped in the moment they left you. Still waiting, still hoping. They assume their absence has frozen you in time, as if your world stopped turning the day they walked away. But what they never consider is the possibility that their absence might have been the very thing that set you free. That while they were out there living their life, you were busy rebuilding yours. And that realization that you moved on, that you became stronger, that you no longer need them, is what shakes them to their core. It challenges their perception of their own importance in your life. Because people like to believe they are irreplaceable. They like to believe that their presence or their absence holds power over you. But the moment you prove them wrong, the moment you show them that life did not just continue but flourished without them, they start to question everything. This is where the shift happens. When you evolve, when you change, not for them, but for yourself, you disrupt the narrative they had written about you. You become unfamiliar to them. And human nature is drawn to mystery, to the things we can no longer fully grasp. They see your growth, your confidence, your independence, and suddenly they wonder, did I make a mistake? But here's the thing, your transformation was never about making them regret leaving. It was never about proving anything to them. It was about you stepping into your own power. It was about realizing that you were never abandoned. You were redirected. You were given the space to become the person you were always meant to be. And the irony is, when you finally reach this place, when you no longer crave their validation, when their return is no longer something you wait for, that's usually when they come back. Not because they deserve a second chance, but because they see what they lost. They see that you've become someone they don't recognize, someone they can't control, someone they now have to earn. But the real question is, do you even want them back? Because the version of you they left is gone. And the version of you that stands here today may not have space for them anymore. That's the beauty of growth. It changes what we once thought we wanted. It teaches us that love should not have to be chased, that respect should not have to be begged for, and that true connections do not crumble at the first sign of distance. So if they return, let it not be because you waited. Let it not be because you needed them to see your worth. Let it be because you became so whole within yourself that their presence or absence no longer defines your happiness. That is real power, and when you own it, you realize that the person who truly needed to change was never you. It was them. There's an undeniable truth about human nature. We don't truly appreciate something until we fear losing it for good. It's not absence alone that sparks regret. It's the realization that the door they once thought would always be open is now closing. When someone leaves you, they assume they'll always have the option to return. That the love you gave, the patience you showed, the way you made them feel, will still be waiting untouched whenever they decide to come back. But what happens when you rewrite that narrative? When you genuinely move forward, not as a strategy, not as a performance, but because you've outgrown what they once offered. You shift the dynamic entirely. They come back not because they love you the way they should have before, but because they sense something they can no longer control. And nothing unsettles a person more than losing the grip they never thought they'd have to fight for. There's a stark difference between someone returning because they realize your worth and someone coming back because they fear your evolution without them. Pay attention to which it is, because when you truly heal, when you build a life so rich, so full, so deeply rooted in your own strength, you'll realize that their absence was never the loss. It was the lesson. A lesson in knowing that love should never leave you second-guessing yourself. That real love doesn't gamble with your presence. And that the love you truly deserve won't require you to prove your worth. They will start chasing you. But not because you waited for them. Not because you made yourself smaller, hoping they'd return, but because you stopped waiting. Because you stepped into your power. Because you became the person they always hoped you wouldn't, the person who no longer needs them. That's what makes them uncomfortable. That's what makes them rethink everything. But here's the catch. By the time they realize what they had, you have already moved on from needing them to see it. And that is the most powerful shift of all. So if someone left you and now wants to return, Don't ask, why are they back? Ask yourself, do they even belong in the life I've built without them? Because chances are you've outgrown the very love you once thought you couldn't live without.